Welcome, everyone, to another installment of Coffee with Carl. Today, I have Ruben Delgado Powell, CPA with Brontide. Ruben's specialty is working with government contractors on employee benefits plans. His firm as well has a specialty across the insurance, tax, and accounting space. Welcome, Ruben. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Carl. I really appreciate your time today. And yeah, like you said, I work with Brontide. We work predominantly with government contractors in the in providing audits, reviews, compilations, tax services, accounting services, things of that nature. Usually, though, whenever it comes to our government contractors, they have an employee benefit plan attached to them, 401ks mostly. And that's where I come in, where I fully specialize in employee benefit plan audits related to our clients as well.
Perfect. Thank you for a quick overview. With that, we have kind of an exciting docket where we're trying to do our best to make it as exciting as possible. With the year end, there's going to be some changes when it comes to retirement plans, specifically in the defined contribution slash 401k space. For many of you guys have been getting contacted about Secure Act 2.0. Really wanted to have Ruben spend some time unpacking what that actually means to you guys. Beyond that, we're going to talk a little bit about audits, do's and don'ts, as well as triggers when it comes to when an audit's going to be involved. So for some of you folks, as you guys have had great success in growing the business, there could be some changes on the audit front as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ruben to talk a little bit about Secure Act 2.0 and how that can affect your guys' business and some of the things to be mindful of. Go ahead, Ruben.
Thanks, Carl. So Secure 2.0, just a heads up, this is going to be a very quick, high-level sort of overview about the Secure 2.0 Act of 2022. I know there's been a lot of talk about it, Carl, and we hear it all the time now. And a lot of these provisions have gone into play, but some of these upcoming provisions are going into play next year and things of that nature. But just a quick background about it. It was kind of a two-part thing, so to speak. You had the Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement Act of 2019, the Secure Act, which was pretty much that foundation. But then later on down the line, we had Securing a Strong Retirement Act of 2022, which was then called Secure 2.0 back in 2022, late 2022. Several provisions, over 90 provisions that affect a wide variety of things. But some of the bigger areas that I'd like for us to focus on today are going to be some of the enhancements and some of those provisions that affect most defined contribution plans, it does affect defined benefit plans and health and welfare plans, but for the purposes of our discussion, we'll focus mostly on the defined contribution slash 401k plans. But some of those include automatic enrollment, required minimum distribution ages. But another big one right here is the eligibility for long-term part-time workers. That is a mouthful right there. A tongue
Yeah.
twister. Say that 5 times fast. But at the end of the day, what this does is it provides more opportunity across a greater population for individuals to be able to save for retirement. That was really a huge, the whole point of this,
Yeah.
so to speak, in addition to various other things. But it's got several titles. For the purposes of our discussion today, we're going to focus more on Title 1, Title 3, and very, very briefly on Title 6. So we'll go ahead and get right into it. Title 1. Also known as expanding coverage and increasing retirement savings. This is the big one of the big ones that we just talked about, automatic enrollment and escalation requirement. Plans are now going to have to implement what's called auto enrollment and auto escalation. Well, what that means is after a new employee satisfies the plan's eligibility requirements, the plan is going to have to automatically enroll that employee into the plan. And there's a set percentage that is required to be followed. There's a minimum of 3%, not to exceed 10. And then, of course, there's an escalation provision, which every year after that, they're supposed to get an escalated percentage in their deferral percentage. So again, employees can opt out of that if they want to, just like opting out of almost any kind of 401k plan. But yeah, that's kind of going to be one of the bigger things there. And those take place beginning after December 31st, 2024. Okay. The RMD ages. Okay, now this is already kind of taken effect, where they increased the age from age it was what 70 and a half, and then it went up a little bit, but now it's to 73, and then beginning 10 years later, it's going to be age 75. I know that was a little strange. I had to stare at that a couple times, but yes, it was 2033 is when the RMD age is going to be switched to age 75.
Yeah, to elaborate on that, it was 70 and a half, then they changed it to 72,
Mhm.
and then now we're at 73. And again,
Yep.
that's all depending on, what age you reach these different benchmarks. But then again, we'll have that further pushed to age 75 10 years from now.
Yep. Yep. And just one thing to note that failure to adhere to the RMD rules, there are penalties. There's an excise tax that has to be paid. However, the new Secure 2.0 Act has reduced some of those RMD failure excise taxes applicable, which is nice. The higher catch-up threshold for individuals at ages 60 to 63. Again, this begins after December 31, 2024. But essentially, what that did was it just said, okay, well, if you're at this age range, in addition to that catch-up that we do, you're going to be eligible to do the greater of $10,000 or 150% of the current catch-up. So in other words, for 2025, that catch up is going to be 11,250. Now that's in addition to the catch up.
Perfect. Yeah, so
So
we have the base level of catch up just like anybody else, plus an additional amount.
yep, yep, yep. And that of course again is part of the whole point of this. It's allowing more savings. I mean, amongst a greater population, so to speak. And then let's see here. The next thing we have are the long-term part-time employee participation. I have to say that very carefully. I always want to tongue twister right there. But again, this is a big one. This is going to affect your counts. It's going to affect, whether or not it could affect whether or not you get an audit later on down the line. And we're going to talk about that a little later. But the Secure Act, okay, not Secure 2.0, but Secure Act kind of set that baseline initially a couple of years ago. But Secure 2.0, it reduced the year requirement because the original Secure Act, was a 3-year requirement. Secure 2.0 does a 2-year requirement, and also disregards certain service before 2021 as it relates to vesting. But in other words, what this provision is going to do is, again, more people are going to become eligible to participate in the plan. You may not necessarily need to put in employer contributions. However, that's all depending on how your plan is written.
So for a lot of these part-time folks, it won't change necessarily anything as far as receiving a match or safe harbor or profit sharing. It's just going to be in relation to being able to defer their own dollars, correct?
Yep, yep, that is correct. That is correct. Now, if an employer, of course, wants to include them in the match, sure, why not? But
Mhm.
it is an option.
Perfect.
Yep. All righty, Title One. Um, we have distributions. They brought in several distributions, not just from this title, but I believe also in Title Three. Title Three or Title Six, I can't remember. But this one here from Title One has to do with emergency expenses. It's a voluntary thing. You can add it to your plan. You can exclude it from your plan. It's not really required, but it allows an employee or a participant, excuse me, to take money out for certain emergency distributions, or excuse me, certain emergency expenses. Same thing with the student loan payments. That one's another big one. I do know that there's still some guidance yet to be released from the IRS because there has been some interim guidance on how to treat this and how to report it. But it's just there's a lot of questions surrounding it. But again, this is a voluntary provision if you want to offer it to your employees. Essentially, what happens is you get documentation or you get some kind of form or some kind of proof saying that they're making payments to their student loans, and those student loan payments get treated as employee contributions for the purpose of matching. so
Mhm.
to speak. So you calculate a match off of those payments.
Yeah,
Um,
I've also seen a number of the vendors really struggle with this because they're certainly still working through that. And I think they're in very much a wait and see approach as well as there's more legislation coming out of Congress and more direction. So this is one of the ones we haven't seen it enact. We don't expect it to be fully enacted across a lot of plans, but it's just something to be mindful. You'll probably see more use of this as we get into 2025, 2026 as we get a little more information from the government.
Yep, yep, exactly. And they're also still releasing technical corrections and all those other little corrections. They'll say things along the lines of, we, in this provision, we wrote this, but we actually meant this. So they're still working on, everyone's still working on it. So yeah, but stay tuned on that one. Pension linked emergency savings accounts. That's another kind of tongue twister right there. It's it's exactly kind of what it sounds like. It's another savings account set aside that a participant can take money out of, like out of a short-term savings account, so to speak. It can't exceed $2,500, and it's considered a Roth contribution. If an employee is electing to contribute into this type of account, it is considered Roth contributions. And keep in mind that this will affect the annual 402G limits. So it's one thing that you want to keep an eye on if you do want to offer this to your employees, to just make sure that nobody goes over those limits. Otherwise, you'll have to make some corrections and then more headaches come. And yeah, nobody likes dealing with that, right? Go to the next thing here. All righty. So that was Title One. Title Three, simplification and clarification of retirement plan rules. Um, Top heavy testing. In other words, um, you can exclude certain employees who haven't met the age or service requirements from that top heavy testing. It's a very similar concept to what's already done in some of the other non-discrimination tests performed, where you can exclude certain populations or approach it in a different way. So they just kind of extended this to the top heavy testing and should help mitigate any costs of corrections or mitigate any risks of failure when it comes to the top heavy testing. And just very quickly, the top heavy testing is, it's one of those tests that is required of certain plans. Most plans tend to, like the safe harbor plans, tend to pass that test relatively quickly, or not relatively quickly, immediately. But other plans, depending on your highly comps, depending on how many are eligible to participate in the plan, it's one of those things that is just required by annually for testing. Next thing, Roth accounts. Okay, this one very quickly. Roth accounts and pre-death distributions. These are not subject to RMDs before death anymore, but do keep in mind that if you're not distributing these accounts out, that it's going to increase your counts of the account balances, which could then, of course, affect whether you're going to get an audit or not. So but yeah, just one of those things to keep in mind that beginning after December 31, 2023, the Roth accounts are not going to be subject to RMDs, just the Roth portion. Everything else, sure,
Mhm.
but Roth portion. All right. And let's see. Safe harbor corrections for missed deferrals. Yes. So when it comes to this, uh, missed deferrals is something that does happen every once in a while. The payroll person was out, or you didn't receive the email from your third party record keeper, and you just accidentally missed, taking deferrals out of a person's paycheck. When something like that happens, you're now allowed to kind of well, in this case, it has to do more with automatic enrollment and things of that nature. But there's now a safe harbor provision behind the corrections that you need to make as it relates to those automatic enrollment and escalation features, because that's a lot to implement. Automatic enrollment, automatic escalation. There is some administrative relief from that. However, at the same time, it can it can be burdensome, especially if the payroll system is not configured properly to count the service or count the eligibility provisions, et cetera, to automatically enroll those participants. So that's where this comes into play here.
This will be a question we can go over in on the audit side, but when it comes to auto enrollment misses and contributions, I imagine that's one of the big areas where audits do occur.
So we do test that when it comes to our audits. We always ensure that we select new individuals from the census file, and we'll talk about that census file later. And we try to make sure that we include somebody who was automatically enrolled to make sure that they were enrolled timely and at the correct amount after meeting those eligibility provisions. There are cases where it's almost like you meet the eligibility provisions and you're given a time period after that, sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes 30 days, to decide whether or not you want to participate or not. And if you don't make a decision, then you're automatically enrolled.
Right.
Consistency is key. That's what it comes down to. If it's a consistent 2 weeks after somebody meets the eligibility provisions and then gets enrolled, awesome. As long as it's seen across the board, then sure, awesome. But if one person is 2 weeks, another person is, I don't know, 45 days, another person is maybe 60 days, it just, yeah, it's not something you want to see. You want consistency, because you want to be able to show and you want to be able to know that everyone has the same opportunity as everyone else to participate in the plan and put their money aside to save for retirement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, you want to make sure everyone's treated fairly, right?
Exactly.
So whether it's a week or 2 weeks, I think that's a really helpful point when it comes to some of these misses.
Yep. 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 Okay, so there was that piece. And then let's see, overpayment recovery. So if you happen to overpay somebody in their account or vested balance or something of that sort, is it worth chasing? If was it $20 that you overpaid or was it $60,000? Well, obviously you want to go over, you want to go and chase that $60,000. But $20, $20, it's $20. Is it really worth it? Is it worth the cost? Um, Voluntary distribution changes. Okay, again, we talked about some other distribution, well, the other distribution, the emergency distribution earlier in Title One. This is the title where it talks about the other ones here. And there's one available for those who have experienced domestic abuse. You're allowed to take up to $10,000. Available after December 31st, 2023. And you must self-certify, of course. That documentation piece is key. Um, and I know that's we're getting into that world where everything's electronic nowadays, but there's a source document somewhere. And when it comes to the participant self-certifying, self-certification means that they have the documentation on hand somewhere, whether in electronic or whether in paper form, to be able to support that distribution. But yes, this is one of the distributions that was added to that was added as a result of Secure 2.0. Mandatory cash out threshold has now been increased from 5,000 to 7,000. Again, a voluntary provision that you may want to implement to keep your numbers down, to keep your counts down. Because again, as you creep up in that participant balance number, then you're at risk of triggering the audit, of course.
Which, very straightforward, can add a lot of cost to your plan. So,
Absolutely.
that's one of the things we're trying to do here is just give you some different things that you really can enact to try to lower the risk of an audit and some of those triggers.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. And then reliance of certain deemed hardship distributions. Again, self-certification it's a thing, where of course the employee or the participant says that they have the source documentation to support the hardships that they took, of course. So it's effective for distributions December 29th, 2022. All righty. And this one's going to be very quick. This one, stumbled across here, the catch-up of elective deferrals on for high earners. Those now are to be Roth basis. Every so for let me see, I think it was 2026 or
Yep.
2025. Okay, yeah, $145,000 in FICA wages is your baseline to determine whether you have a high earner for this provision or not. And it's adjusted annually, of course, for inflation and things of that nature. But whenever a person reaches that threshold, their catch-up deferrals now must be on a Roth basis, which, yeah, again, is very interesting thing I stumbled across. And then Roth employer contributions. Now, this is going to be where employers will now be allowed to contribute um, uh, their contributions on a Roth basis. Of course, that'll affect the W-2 reporting and things of that nature. No, excuse me. No, I think it's 1099. Yep, contributions will be reported on a 1099-R. It's going to affect the 1099-R reporting where, the match will be on that since it's on an after-tax basis.
Yeah. So I mean, simply put, anyone that's making over 145,000, if they want to do a catch-up contribution, meaning they're over the age of 50, it's going to be on after tax basis. The government wants their money now, for the high earners. Everyone else will be, continuous status quo, but that's, we got another year for that. That'll be coming forward in 2026 at the start.
Yep. Yep. So now we're getting into the fun parts, right? The annual audit, the do's and don'ts of the annual audit. All right. So I think when a lot of people hear the term auditor, okay, it's like terrifying because we all think IRS, right? Well, what you want to do is you want to work with your auditor. You want to work with us, um, because we are not your enemy. Okay, we are not from the DOL. We're not from the IRS, the SEC. We're not placing anyone under arrest. We're not here to assess tax penalties, interest, or charges, or anything of that sort. We're not going to be reporting you to the IRS. We're not going to be sending you to jail. We're not going to. We're a firm that has been, or your auditor. They've been hired by your company to come and look at your 401k plan because DOL says that you have to have your 401k plan looked at by an auditor. Um, we're not there to make your life miserable, although it may seem that way sometimes, but that's not what we're there to do. Um,
I think it may seem that way for a lot of folks, but I mean, I've had plenty of calls over my career, but that's honestly why I've partnered with, Brontide. They make it very easy to work with. At the end of the day, it's all about a collaboration.
yeah,
So their job is to keep you out of trouble. So the more that you can have that open lines of communication to better understand what they need, the more likely you are to get through the audit quicker and then ultimately pass with flying colors to make sure we don't have any issues in the future.
yep, yep, exactly, exactly. So, work with us. Again, we're not mean. At least most of us are not mean. We're there to, and we can always present additional ideas. We're always open to feedback as to, how we could probably do something a little bit easier, or asking questions. Asking questions is important. Why this, why that? And it's fine to ask questions. That way, I think when we all understand what the task at hand is and what we're trying to accomplish, once we all understand that together, it makes it a little bit easier and a little less scary, so to speak. I have had clients who have straight up avoided me because they told me at one point that they were terrified of me because I was the auditor, and I said I'm not. I don't have any kind of authority to. I don't even know how to respond to that. So yeah, that's just the biggest thing here. Work with your auditor. Next thing, and this is important because it serves as a communication medium. Utilize the secure file sharing resource offered by your auditor. Okay, we use ShareFile here at Brontide, but others may use the CCH portal, SureLink, Engagement Organizer, things of that nature. Those are a great tool to just be able to share something securely without you having to password protect everything, and sending it through email, which I do not recommend sending anything of that sort with sensitive information by email. We all know, we all know, we see it all the time. There's always a breach, there's always a hack, there's always something that happens. And it's a little bit terrifying at times, but using these file sharing resources it can help mitigate that risk a little bit. And of course, if you're having trouble with it, please reach out, ask questions, say, hey, is there a way I can do this? Or hey, is the server down? Or hey, I can't get my password to work. Can you help me? And of course, we'll be more than glad to help you with that. All right. Do keep everyone in the loop, all of your audit team, and don't leave out audit team members. Don't send one document to this one team member. Don't send another separate document to another team member. If you know who your dedicated team members are, keep them all together in one email chain. That way everybody knows what's going on. Or hey, maybe somebody got sick and someone else can jump in. The partner, on the other hand, I'd probably leave the partner out of communications because I would bring the partner in and maybe very as needed basis or for consultations or to address something egregious, something along those lines. Now it's going to vary firm by firm, but just something to keep in mind that it would kind of help the entire team, including yourself and your team members, if everybody who is involved in the audit was on that email chain. And if this is your very first audit, all right, if you know that you're going to be over that threshold that we'll talk about in a little bit, you want to start working on that now. Don't wait until July, which just so you know, July 31st is the first major deadline when it comes to employee benefit plans. It's the unextended due date for Form 5500 filings. Um, don't wait until July to say, hey, I need an audit. Can we get this done before the end of July?
What is the typical time frame for first audits and then ongoing audits?
It can, so for first year audits, it can take up 8 to 10 weeks or so, give or take. 4 to 6 weeks for a ongoing audit. I will say 8 to 10 is stretching it quite a bit. It's almost doubling it, and that's because it depends. It depends on the circumstances. It depends on responsiveness. It depends on some team members or some clients that I've worked with have never been through an audit before, and like never once, and they weren't sure what to expect. So it dragged on maybe a little bit more, which is understandable, of course, at the end of the day.
What are
But
some things that they may need to have, or you would try to have prepared as they enter this process? I think that'd be really helpful to address.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into some of those items here in a little bit. I did put together a very quick list of items to consider putting together for the audit. But it's of course not all inclusive, but it is something that we can touch on in a little bit if we want to hold on a couple slides.
Okay.
Good deal. Okay. Do's and don'ts. Address all the questions and requests, ensuring to maintain the close communication with us. Skipping requests because it looks too hard or you're not sure, that's just going to delay us a little bit more. It's going to delay all of us a little bit more. Feel free to pick up the phone, send an email, say, "Hey, I have no idea what this is. You know what? I'm just gonna call you. I'm just gonna call you right away, and we're gonna talk through these open items right now because I don't understand what you're asking." Not giving us some of those crucial, those like preliminary requests, so to speak, can hold us up when it comes to making our sampling for other areas. Like, for example, the plan document, all right, and the census file. Well, if we don't have a copy of the plan document, we don't know how your plan works, and therefore can't make selections from our census file that you gave to us, and therefore we can't really go anywhere. So it's all a domino effect that can occur. And keep in mind that because of this new Secure 2.0 Act, there's going to be more requests coming. So for the recurring audits, there's going to be additional requests for things like the hourlies, or any other documentation that was relied upon for distributions or things of that nature. So just something to keep in mind there.
Yeah, why don't you add
All
a couple?
right.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead and throw a couple more of those out there for the group.
Okay. The census file. This one, I kid you not, is always a serious topic. The census file must be complete and it must be reconciled. You must ensure that it has all the cells, all the columns that are being requested, your date of birth, date of hire, date of termination, et cetera, et cetera. And that your finance team or your payroll team or someone within has done a reconciliation of the wages and the contributions and things of that nature to a W-3 because that makes sure that it's complete and that makes sure that everyone's been accounted for. And we
Mhm.
need to make sure that when we go in and make those selections as auditors, we have a complete population to select from. If our population is not complete, then we have to backtrack. And depending on how incomplete the population was, it's kind of starting at square one. Again, depending on the nature, depending on how many, et cetera, et cetera. But that census file, it's crucial that it's complete and reconciled to a W-3 or 941. And again, your finance team may have already done it. It may have already been done at some point when you submitted it to your third-party administrator for compliance testing. So just keep that in mind, that it'll save everyone a lot of time, a lot of headache, a lot of face palms, whenever it comes to the audit.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I mean, in general, I think the growing theme here is communication, uh,
Yes,
and working as a team.
absolutely.
Like you listed them
Absolutely.
as
Oh,
well.
go back one. Now
Yeah.
this one I think is important here. But introducing us to your third parties, uh, and others within your company who do the operations of the plan. Um, I think that's relatively important because if you're unsure, you can always say, "Hey, do you mind reaching out to so and so and asking about this?" Or, "Hey, do you mind reaching out to somebody at this place to see if they can fulfill your request?" It brings us all together, as one big team, and we can address questions, comments, concerns just right then and there. Yep. Okay. Oh, so
Yeah.
one of the big things I want to point out is the SOC 1 reports. I know, like it immediately made some people cringe just thinking about that SOC 1 report. But I will say the SOC 1 report is actually it's got a lot of interesting information in it, surprisingly. But I'm a nerd and I'm proud and I love reading about that kind of stuff. But bear in mind that there's stuff in there that talks about processing the transactions or what controls they have or what reports they run and what reports you can probably run. But the key things to keep in mind are the opinion, the tests performed by the auditor who audited that third party service provider, any exceptions that were noted, management's response to those exceptions, and the complementary user entity controls. Now, the complementary user entity controls are what I'm going to use Fidelity, for example, are what Fidelity says, okay, hey, we have controls here, but you need to have controls too. And here are the controls that we're telling you that you should probably implement.
Mhm.
Those are things to keep in mind. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to get that SOC 1 and you'll want to look at those key areas and you'll want to say, okay, I know there hasn't been any fraud. I see there are exceptions here with distributions. Hey, like, is everything okay? Did it hurt us? Um, Things, it's like a risk assessment. It's a monitoring thing. Fiduciary responsibility is something that you'll hear, and you have the ultimate responsibility of the plan. And
Yeah.
part of that is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I guess, so I think the overarching theme here is, folks listening, is the communication side.
Mhm.
One of the things, and kind of we go through this and transition a little bit to the triggers, but I think one of the things we really need to drive home is walk us through just a couple key points outside of the kind of do's and don'ts at the high level. What are some things that you see as issues that you've come across the most, whether it's late contributions, files, whatever it may be? What are a couple, if you mind, just list out a couple things that you tend to see where you end up having the biggest headaches, and even it could be as simple as hey, they don't have listings for cyber, they don't have an investment policy statement. We mind just
Cool.
spend a couple minutes there and then we can talk a little bit about one of the key triggers.
Okay. All right. So I will say this was actually the most times I've seen this happen this year, but it was not maintaining um, or not upkeeping the list of those who had authorized access to the record keeper or the payroll system. There were a couple of instances where the person had been terminated months ago and was still listed as having access to the payroll system. Oh my goodness, there's so much that could happen with that, especially if it was a very bad termination, so to speak.
So what
Um,
under a scenario like that, what do you obviously you guys are there to help to coach them through that. Is it if they were audited and they found that out, is that something that could get them fined or what does that look like?
I don't think it's something that would get them fined, but I do think it is. I do know it is something that requires attention. It absolutely requires attention across the board. Anytime you let somebody go, or anytime somebody changes a job position, say they left the payroll team and they went to the marketing team, there should be a process that says, "Hey, IT, please remove their access," or "Hey, I need to make sure I remove their access." Um, and when it comes to us as auditors, when we see that, it's something that requires additional documentation in our files about a discussion that we had as to, what happened, why it happened, and what could potentially happen if it's not rectified. And what we will do then at the end of the day is we'll include it in a letter to management or governance or whoever saying, hey, we have this. It's a finding. No one's going to jail or anything like that. But hey, it's something that you need to look into.
Yeah, walk us through real quick a little bit about things to be mindful of when it comes to investment policy statements or process for meeting minutes, or just reviews in general with clients. I think it's helpful for what you're better understand what you're looking for in those scenarios.
Sure. So when it comes to the investment policy statement, well, an investment policy statement is literally it's there to help you and it's there to help you with benchmarking and determining which investments you're willing to, or the plan is willing to invest in, which investments are not going to be invested in. Sometimes it names a committee in it. Sometimes it goes as far as saying, hey, we require these returns. If it doesn't meet these returns, it defines the investment piece of the plan itself.
Is
And having one on hand is great because it's a guide. It's your guide. It's your manual on how investments for this plan should be operating. And adherence to that policy is important because if it's your control, but you want to be adhering to your controls, So and that's of course something that you would do with your investment advisor, your investment consultant, your plan consultant, and in putting that together. Okay, which investments would work, which investments are the best for this and that and the other, and yeah, yeah.
what do you think about, or what do you look for in meeting minutes? Is there anything that you try to make sure that all the plans are noting? Whether it be who's on the committee or key factors. What are some things that you really try to find when you're looking through meeting minutes?
When it comes to meeting minutes, I like to look for any discussions that were held as it relates to any potential issues, such as, hey, we've been paying somebody an annual distribution of $200,000, but we shouldn't have been. Here's what we're going to do about it. Or, hey, we're going to amend the plan to do this. The amendment will be approved next month. And then we want to see that approved amendment. We use those meeting minutes it tells us so much. When good meeting minutes are held, it tells us so much. Like, hey, we know that there's an amendment. Now we know we need to ask for that amendment. Or it'll tell us about that potential litigation. Sometimes litigation is discussed in those meeting minutes, which will then require, depending on what happens and the nature and and et cetera, et cetera. May require disclosure in the financial statements, may require a letter to be sent to legal counsel, but that's going to vary case by case. And I'd also like to see the plan metrics, the plan performance, and all of that discussed in the meeting minutes as well.
Yeah, one thing that I typically highly recommend, and you hear this from Department of Labor and just legal, is referencing reviews of the funds, referencing reviews of the target date, as well as referencing reviews of the plan expenses, advisor expenses,
Yep.
as well as expenses for the plan administrator. So I think it's really important, guys, to highlight each of those individual facts when you have your meeting minutes as well as your investment policy statement, at least from my perspective. I know Ruben will probably dig a little bit deeper when it comes into your process for cyber, but for many of my clients, and I'm sure many of you folks out there, you're working with some of the bigger vendors, and they're pretty airtight now when it comes to cyber. Now, if you have one of those one-off companies, maybe a different story, but when you're with some of the bigger names, they're pretty good on that end.
Yep.
So with that, I want to transition a little bit towards the actual triggers. So folks actually understand this is great. We now know what you're looking for, do's and don'ts at the basic level, as well as having a discussion around some important factors. So tell us a little bit about when an audit actually happens.
Sure. So let me, we kind of talked about all of this. So, the audit. Well, this is only mind you, this is only surrounding defined contribution plans, the 401k plans. It can be a little bit different when it comes to health and welfare plans, but that's or same thing with defined benefit plans. But we will cross that bridge maybe sometime at a completely different time period. So, general rule. The number of participants with account balances equals or exceeds 100. Okay. So once you hit that 100 mark, that's when, boom, we're going to need an audit. And that's when, again, we talked about RMDs earlier and cashing out those RMDs or, and increasing that force out threshold, that's going to help you keep your participant count low, your participant balance count low, excuse me. So there's, of course, always like a accept or like a maybe sort of thing, and that's the 80-20. And very quickly, the 80-20 is if your account balances are between 80 and 120 as of the beginning of the plan year, and a small plan, the plan filed as a small plan in the prior year, then you can continue to file as a small plan. In other words, you don't need an audit. That is a very quick explanation. There's a little bit more that you may want to zone in on when it comes to analyzing this, but that is the quick and dirty explanation of the 80-120 rule.
So, I mean, in general, right, the thing to be mindful, guys, is audits are not cheap, but that's why Brontitis here. When you start getting close to 100 participants, and certainly as you go over that amount, if you have folks that have small account balances, you can use that as a way to push them out of the plan. If you have people that are no longer, how does it work with folks that are no longer employed? Is that still included in the count?
It's an account balance. So if they have an account balance, then they're still considered part of the plan, and therefore that contributes towards the count. Now, if they're no longer employed and they didn't meet that 7,000 threshold, if their account balance was less than that, the plan can just force them out and say, "Here's your money, bye." You know.
And that's the great thing. I mean, you do have the ability to, work with them to do, suggest a rollover. So there's strategies when you're close to those triggers to, you know, to be mindful of. And obviously today the whole idea is to introduce the process. There's, you may already work with an auditor. Brontide's obviously an expert in the space. But my takeaway certainly is get in front of an auditor. Don't wait till we get in halfway through next year. Really start to have those conversations now. So that way your planning you can really get ahead of this and make your lives as easy as possible.
Yep. Yep. And thinking about that now, you'll then get to start gathering those documents that we're going to ask for. Because if this is your plan's first time ever getting audited. You'll hear this many times. The first time being audited is never the easiest. And one of the reasons for that is because we have to go back a couple of years. Depending on how the plan has been run, depending on if there were mergers and things of that nature, um, we have to look at census files from a couple of years. We have to look at payroll registers from a couple of years, plan documents, contracts, meetings, SOC 1s, things of that nature, right then and there. So it's important that if you know you're going to need to get audited, start trying to track this stuff down. Um, I will say a lot of my past experience, I've had instances where the HR team and the payroll team, they were all brand new, and everyone else had left, because sometimes these happen as a result of mergers, and sometimes with mergers, other team members of the previous company or they retire or vice versa. Um, but everyone's new and they don't have any idea where anything is. So planning for that now it'll help you in the long run, and it'll help you get the audit done faster, and that way if you plan it now, you have the time to start accumulating more questions. That way you can present the questions later if need be, or sooner rather than later, vice versa.
And I think as we're finishing up here, Ruben mentioned a really key point. One of the things I've seen is as you had turnover in team, things get lost in the shuffle. You may, or more importantly, if you have turnover in payroll vendors or 401k vendors, that tends to be one of the areas where it becomes even more difficult because when you stop working with some of these vendors, they may, it may be harder to track the right person to get to. So again, I think we just want to stress work together with the auditor, use as your partner, and frankly, understand that they are here to help. I wanted today to use this opportunity again to introduce some of the files that you need on a basic level. So Ruben, thank you for touching on some of these key factors. It's been very helpful. With
Yeah.
that, I know we don't want to hold anyone for too long. So with that, use this opportunity to reach out to myself, reach out to Ruben. We're both a resource. And, once again, thanks, Ruben, for this opportunity. And I look forward to chatting with everyone again in another installment of Coffee with Carl. Thanks, Ruben.
Thank you, Carl. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye now.